Hi, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm Kissel, and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to be going over why I was disappointed in The Butcher and the Wren by Alaina Urquhart. I want to start this video by saying I'm a fan of Morbid. If you did not know, Alaina Urquhart is a co-host on Morbid with her niece Ashley, not to get confused with Ashley Flowers from Crime Junkies, who I will reference a little bit later. I've been a fan of Morbid since I was a freshman in college. They got me through working at Starbucks as a shift manager to, actually graduating and getting my degree. So I was very excited when this book got announced. I was excited to, give Alaina my money when I bought this. I was so excited that I actually got the pre-ordered, which has her signature in it. I really looked forward to getting this book, and I think that's part of the reason why I was so let down with it. Prior to reading this book, I've read two other podcaster books, which seems to be the new YouTuber books. Happy YouTubers are no longer writing books, but don't know how I feel about podcasters doing it now. I don't know if that's worse. Prior to this, I read The Last Book on the Left, which is by The Last Podcast on the Left, which is my favorite podcast. I've seen them live multiple times. As well as I also read All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers, who is the co-host of Crime Junkies. Personally, I don't like Crime Junkies as a podcast, as well as I did not like the book, but for different reasons as to why I don't like this book. I think that All Good People Here was written much better and was a far more interesting story, but that's because it was the John Benet Ramsey case. So I have so much more to say about All Good People Here, which I'll probably do another video about, because I know there's a lot of discourse on if true crime is good, if, we should be ingesting it as a form of entertainment, and, when it goes too far. But I think that All Good People Here is a good example of when true crime goes way too far, and I could talk about that for hours, and I probably will. So come back for that. You want to subscribe though, so, you get the notification when I do post that video. So I would subscribe now, just so you don't miss it later. With that being said, I loved the last podcast book. That was actually just a true crime book in terms of going over serial killers and, going into more detail about those cases. It was far different from Alaina's book or Ashley Flowers, which are both fictions. In the ranking of podcast books, I would put the last podcast book first, then Alaina's, even though I don't like Alaina's writing as much. Ethically, I think this book is far better than Ashley Flowers, but for the writing itself is worse, and I'm sorry, Alaina, for saying that. I am going to be going over spoilers, so if you didn't read the book yet and plan to, or you don't want any spoilers, I would stop the video here and come back once you have read the book. If you have read the book, or you don't really care to read the book and you just want to know my points, keep watching, but this is when the spoilers are coming. A quick summary of this book. The book is told from the point of view of two protagonists. The Bayou Butcher, who goes by Jeremy or Cal, and Dr. Wren. And the story is Dr. Wren's search by going through the clues and, the bodies to apprehend Jeremy, the Bayou Butcher. It's also set in New Orleans, which is a big part of the book. I know that Alaina is also a big fan of New Orleans. She does a lot of cases in New Orleans just because she's a fan of that area. The first chapter is told from the point of view of Jeremy. He already has 2 victims in his basement, and he's looking for a 3rd victim. He uses his school. I don't know if it's a medical school, I believe it is. At least it's a medical class at the school he's going to, where he goes by Cal. And he's looking to abduct his fellow student, Emily. He does successfully abduct her. And then the story kind of cuts to Wren's point of view, where she's now looking at victims and the bodies and finding little clues that the detectives are missing. The big point of this book, which I'm going to actually criticize later on, is Alaina relates to her own personal beliefs a lot in this book, which is fine because obviously you want to build off of things that you know, things that you feel when you're writing. I think that it's a little heavy-handed in terms of Dr. Wren, which again, I'll get to that at a later point. Wren is following, the clues that he's leaving behind. More people are getting killed, bodies are being found. It's a big cat and mouse between Jeremy and Dr. Wren. We'll get to the ending of the book later on. I just want to go through my criticisms and the stuff I liked about the book now, and then we'll finish up what the actual summary of the book is. I think that the first chapter is the most interesting. because it's just the most well written. It's very graphic. It's a little gory in one scene, which I'm a big fan of horror, so I like reading and watching horror, so I think that was well done. I like the character of Jeremy. I think he's very well written and fleshed out. He's written as a killer that is, you know, above society, he looks down on everyone, he thinks that humans are disgusting and, you know, just human interactions are gross. He's very well written as someone that is dry and feels like he's superior to everyone. The thing I didn't like about Jeremy is he's a textbook serial killer. And normally I wouldn't nitpick that in a book or a crime book, but coming from Alaina, who is a true crime podcaster who knows and studies criminals, killers a lot, I expected more of a discourse in terms of killers, whereas I think Jeremy is written as a movie or TV show killer. It's very to the nose kind of serial killer. And if you are into true crime like Alaina is, everyone knows there is a bullet point of things that happen in a serial killer's, you know, developmental stages that, you know, nurture them to be the killer that they are. I think that in terms of Jeremy, he hits almost every bullet point. If we're looking at the serial killer bingo card, I'm pretty sure Jeremy is just missing the traumatic brain trauma to his frontal lobe. Jumping off that, I think something that's upsetting in terms of a book that has two protagonists, for only one of them to be well fleshed out. Like I had said a little bit earlier, Dr. Wren is written as Alaina's character pretty much. As someone that is a fan of Alaina and knows her from the podcast and like just other things that she's worked on, there's things that she's very passionate about, and that reflects not only in her podcast but also in this book. And it's upsetting in terms of those are the only parts of Dr. Wren that are really fleshed out, whereas the rest of the character kind of falls flat and actually comes off smug sometimes, which is upsetting because I like Alaina as a person. I like her on the podcast, and I think that she isn't that way. I think she's very apathetic and sweet, but in terms of this character, she comes off just very smug and very know-it-all. If you're a fan of Morbid, you would know the things that Alaina is passionate about, and you would see that reflected in the book. At some point, Dr. Wren and the detective she's working with on this case to catch the Bayou Killer are at a bar, and I was going to say Alaina's character, but Dr. Wren, unprompted pretty much, goes into a rant about how emo and kids that are outside the norm are singled out to be killers, to be problematic, and to be just like criminals. Just because they dress differently, they wear black, they like, you know, true crime, they like horror, and like the music that they listen to. That when she talks about that specifically, she's talking about the West Memphis 3 case, because she also references the Westboro Baptist Church. I'm not religious in any way, so I kind of have to like, Westboro doesn't sound correct. Westboro Baptist Church. A Baptist church specifically, which is a big part of the West Memphis 3 case. For those of you that don't know, a quick synopsis of that is the West Memphis 3 is the case of 3 teenage boys who were into the occult, into heavy metal, and like had long hair, dressed in all black in West Memphis, were framed and arrested and put to trial for a crime they didn't commit, which was the SA and murder of 3 young boys. This is a case that Alaina references a lot throughout Morbid. She also did, like, I think it was 3-part episode, but she also, besides the 3-part episode, references the West Memphis 3 case multiple times, so it's a case that you know for a fact she's passionate about, and just for this character to go on a, like, page or 2 monologue about it just seems a little heavy-handed. Along with that, she makes a lot of references as a whole to true crime and pop culture. There is one point where she talks about Jeffrey Dahmer for about a page. I think that hurts the story in terms of whatever audience you were trying to achieve. I think that if you're someone like me who is into true crime and already knows a lot about it, having a full page about Jeffrey Dahmer is a little overhanded because we already know about Jeffrey Dahmer. If you're a fan of the podcast, you've listened to their multi-part series on it, as well as probably other podcasts, TV shows, other forms of media that talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. So for a full page of that is just already known and wasted information. And I think on the other hand, granted I can't 100% speak to it because I am a fan of true crime, but I think that if you're not a fan of true crime and just wanted a crime novel, I think going into a vast detail about a real life serial killer might just be not what the reader really wants. They want something that's, you know, a quick read, a crime like dime store novel kind of thing. They don't want actual gory details of a killer. I think that referencing pop culture and true crime hurt the book more than it helped it, also in terms of there isn't a lot of lore or world building or just backstory, and in terms of where that's missing, she makes up for it in referencing true life events or just pop culture, which I think takes you out of the world rather than immerses you more into it. This is also, I don't know where to fit this in, but there's also at one point where she's talking about she's in the car and listening to a true crime podcast, and I don't know if that was supposed to be like a hint at Morbid, but to be honest with you, by how this book was written and how often she references real life serial killers, I was not going to be surprised if she actually plugged Morbid in the book. She didn't, and I'm happy she didn't, but it was like a smidgen away. Now, again, this is my second warning, but if you don't want any spoilers or if you didn't read the book, I'm gonna ruin the ending about now. There is a twist, and I, in theory, like the twist. I think that the twist would have been better if it was executed differently, and it was very upsetting that it was executed in the way that it was. But the twist is Dr. Wren, who has been the forensic pathologist on this case for up to about like a month now, who's like looked at the victims, looked at the crime scene, has been studying this serial killer, realizes that this is the serial killer she was a victim to back when she was in college. Now, Emily is Dr. Wren, and there was a time jump that we weren't aware of. I think that's a great twist, but there's no lead up to it. It just comes out of nowhere, and it just doesn't make 100% sense in terms of the story, because you would think that if you were a victim of a serial killer and you see something similar happening to current day victims, you would be like, oh, that's really weird. Fuck. That brings me back to when I was, you know, getting tortured and had to deal with, you know, this kind of things. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating because I've never been to New Orleans. There might be a lot of bayous, and, like, finding bodies in bayous might be just, like, a norm, but not that I'm aware of. So, like, if I was a victim of this crime and I was like, damn, there's another body in the bayou, that's suspicious, it would bring up some red flags. Especially when you find out later on that Jeremy realizes that Wren is Emily, and he starts leaving clues behind for her, and she literally looks at the clue and she's like, huh, why would a serial killer leave this behind? Not like, damn. Again, I'm getting some PTSD from the shit I'm witnessing right near in front of me. It just takes her too long to realize that she is the victim of the same killer that she's hunting. Especially for a character that we've been told and, like, repeatedly explained to that she's this genius, you know, doctor, that she's this great pathologist, that she didn't realize that. And, like, it's not in terms of she had memory loss, she, like, blacked out. She remembers vividly, and it's not like it comes out of nowhere. She was just like, I didn't want to think about that time. So, like, it just doesn't make any sense. I think there's times where Alaina tried to, because at some point in the beginning of the book, Dr. Wren references how her back hurts, and that, like, you know, there was an issue with her back when she was younger. You find out that she was injected with a formula, I forgot what it is, but some chemical, and it was just put at the wrong place, and that's how she lived, and she was able to get full mobility back. But if it was actually injected in the correct area, she would have been, you know, paralyzed. But that's too vague from a character that's in her 40s, because if someone in their 40s said to me, oh, my back hurts, I'd be like, yeah, you're old as shit. Okay, Ebenezer, pop an Advil and let's move it on with the day. Also, something that, again, might be a nitpick and might just be, from me, a fan of Morbid, Alaina is very empathetic when it comes to the victims, and she makes a point on the podcast to talk about the victims, their experiences, and how what they went through affects them later on in life, and how they have PTSD. And never once is there a case in this book where Wren or Emily, same person, experience trauma or PTSD. I would think that someone who cares so much about that in her podcast would write more of that in a character that is literally a victim of a serial killer, like a surviving victim. I would expect them to have PTSD or even like some kind of trauma. I think that at one point, Alaina, I keep wanting to say Elena's character. I think at one point, Dr. Wren, when she's about to go out with her friends, has a lot of fear and is very anxious about going out. And I think that was supposed to be a case of, her being afraid to enter the real world alone or without someone along her side. Maybe because of what happened when she was a victim of a serial killer. But again, when I was reading that book, I related to it personally because I'm not the most sociable person. My social battery dies very quickly, and reading that part of the book, I was like, yes, going out with 5 people, that sounds draining, especially after a long day of looking at dead bodies. I understand. I'll see you on Tuesday, buddy. We'll reschedule. We'll rain check that shit. My next complaint is I think the point of the book that frustrated me the most, specifically because I am a fan of Morbid. So after realizing that she was a former victim of the Bayou Butcher, Wren confides this into the detective that she's working alongside. And rather than A, take her off the case, and B, do any measure of police work, is just like, oh, well, here's more information that you might not have known. Can you help us solve this case? There's at one point where the Bayou Butcher breaks into Dr. Wren's house and takes her personal belongings and then leaves them at a crime scene so she knows that he knows that she's Emily. Crazy. And she tells that to the detective. And he's still like, yeah, it's okay for you to work on this case. Also, we're not gonna, case your house. We're not gonna give you, extra protection. We're not gonna, put any patrol cars around your house. Fuck that. Let him come into your house. And, we'll catch him there. That's just, that seems safer for you. And why that pisses me off more in this book is because if this was a real life case and Alaina was covering it on Morbid, she would be wringing this detective's neck and complaining about how he's a shitty detective, is putting in no police work, and does not care about this former victim. And it was just like, girl, I know you've said this about detectives in the past. Write your detective like the detective you want it to be. The ending of this book also pisses me off. And I also kind of saw it coming because Alaina references Silence of the Lambs so much, and I know Elena's a fan of the Silence of the Lamb, but the butcher gets away. He's shot, he runs off into the bayou, and then they find a dead body, and then she's like, oh, well, even though I'm a victim, still, by the way, I'm on this case, I'm gonna do some, detective work for myself. I'm gonna, be the forensic pathologist still, and goes to look at the body, and she's like, hey, yo, guys, this is not the killer. And they're like, okay, well, he got away. That's very Silence of the Lambs. It's very Silence of the Lambs into the Red Dragon of her to do, and it's obviously a way for her to write a next book. I wanted to reference this earlier, actually. The reason why I'm doing this story now is not because I now have a YouTube channel and you have to listen to me, but also because the paperback just got released and the first chapter of the sequel is in it, and I think that this book was very much written with a sequel in mind. Nitpicks I didn't know 100% where to put in, along with Dr. Wren being written like Alaina as a either current or former autopsy technician. The book at times is very medically dry, where Dr. Wren is going into depth about these medical procedures and just reasons that she knows why the victim was killed like this, or certain things that the victim went through, which to some degree I appreciated because that is cool. It's a deeper insight than I think you would normally get. But at some point, it kind of just feels like when my dad is explaining why my car sounds funny. I don't understand. I'm not going to understand. How do we fix it? I think the book was written a lot more as a manuscript for a movie or TV show, or even, worstly, when a big movie does well and they want to make a book for an extra cash grab. It seems a lot more like that rather than a standalone novel, which is upsetting. And granted, this was Elena's debut novel, so I hope that in the next book, I'm obviously going to read it, some of the things about characters not being fleshed out and the pacing be a little off, a little rushed, and the ending being so abrupt, I hope stuff like that is developed more so it's a more enjoyable, cohesive novel. But right now, as someone that was a fan of Morbid, I was very disappointed with this book, as you could probably tell from this rant. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you read the book and what your thoughts about it, or if you read the Ashley Flowers book, and if you want me to do a, deeper dive into that one and tell you my complete thoughts and feelings about that. I'm probably going to either way, whether you tell me or not, but let me know you want it. That would be nice. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and hope you have a beautiful day.